All right, let's talk about a company that promised a revolution in healthcare, but what it delivered was something far, far more dangerous. A complete deception.
Just look at that number, $9 billion. I mean, that's what this company, Theranos, was supposedly worth at its peak, and it was all built around this one incredibly charismatic young founder.
And her name, of course, was Elizabeth Holmes. You couldn't miss her. She was literally everywhere, on the cover of Forbes, Fortune, you name it. The world was hailing her as the next Steve Jobs.
So the big question is, how did all of that just vanish? How did it all become worthless? Well, that's exactly what we're going to unpack here. The spectacular rise and the even more spectacular and catastrophic fall of Theranos.
So let's rewind. The story really kicks off back in 2003. You've got this 19-year-old Stanford dropout, Elizabeth Holmes, and she has this deep, personal fear of needles and an idea that on the surface sounded like it could change the world.
And the pitch? Oh, it was brilliant. It was absolutely irresistible. Imagine being able to run hundreds of blood tests from your cholesterol all the way to cancer markers with just a single tiny drop of blood from your fingertip. No more big needles. Holmes called it democratizing healthcare. She was going to put this power into everyone's hands with this sleek little box she named the Edison.
But here's the thing. It wasn't just about the tech. It was about the person selling the dream. Holmes built this whole persona, right? She deliberately modeled herself after Steve Jobs. The black turtleneck, that was no accident. And her voice, that deep, kind of commanding voice, turns out that was completely manufactured. She was faking it to sound more authoritative. It really wasn't just a startup. It was a performance. And man, she knew how to sell that vision.
And that vision she was selling, it was so compelling that it brought in some of the most powerful people on the planet. And they didn't just invest a little, they poured in hundreds of millions of dollars.
Okay, so here's where it gets really interesting. Look at this board of directors she put together. This doesn't look like the board of a medical tech company, does it? It looks more like a national security council. I mean, you've got Henry Kissinger, George Shultz, General James Mattis. These are huge names.
So what did these guys know about blood testing and medical devices? Absolutely nothing. And that was exactly the point. Their expertise wasn't in science, it was in power. It was in influence. Their names were like this giant shield of credibility. It was all about social proof, making other investors feel like, wow, if these guys are in, I can afford to miss out.
And guess what? It worked. With that shield of credibility firmly in place, the money just poured in. We're talking huge investments from people like Rupert Murdoch, the Walton family of Walmart fame, Betsy DeVos's family. And then came the big retail partnerships, deals with Walgreens and Safeway. But here's the kicker, none of them were ever allowed to independently validate the technology. They just had to take her word for it. All right, so on the outside, you've got Elizabeth Holmes on the cover of every magazine, giving these inspiring TED Talks. But what was actually going on inside the labs? Well, that was a whole different story. It was a secret, and a really dangerous one at that.
Remember that little black box, the Edison machine? The one that was supposed to change the world? Well, the truth is, it didn't work. It just didn't. It wasn't just a little off, it was wildly inaccurate, dangerously unreliable. The pitch she was giving the world and the reality inside the lab couldn't have been more different.
So, if the Edison didn't work, what were they doing? Here's the real Theranos method. They'd take that tiny finger prick sample, okay? But since it wasn't enough blood, they'd secretly dilute it, water it down essentially. And then they'd just run that corrupted sample on a normal, off-the-shelf machine made by one of their competitors, like Siemens. The patients had no idea. They thought they were getting this futuristic test, but it was all just a complete sham that put their health at risk.
And this wasn't just a business problem. We're talking about real people, real patients, getting results that were dangerously wrong. There's this one story of a doctor who got a Theranos test and was told he was pre-diabetic. Can you imagine that? The stress, the confusion, maybe even being put on medication for a condition you don't actually have. It's just terrifying.
So how did this all come crashing down? The truth only ever saw the light of day because a handful of incredibly brave employees on the inside decided they couldn't live with the lie anymore. They risked absolutely everything to expose what was happening. And believe me, this was no easy task. The culture inside Theranos, run by Holmes and her secret boyfriend and COO, Sunny Balwani, was one of pure fear. We're talking constant surveillance. Employees were kept in silos so they couldn't talk to each other. If you dared to question the technology, you'd be threatened, maybe fired.
They even hired private investigators to follow former employees. It was intense.
So these are the real heroes of the story. You have John Carriott, the Wall Street Journal reporter who just would not let this go. You have young employees like Tyler Schultz, who, by the way, was the grandson of board member George Schultz, and Erica Chung. They were just starting their careers and risked it all because they knew people's lives were at stake. And then there's the truly tragic story of Ian Gibbons, the chief scientist. He knew the tech was a fraud, and facing immense pressure right before he was supposed to testify, he took his own life.
Okay, so once the whistle was blown, how did this whole house of cards come tumbling down? And maybe more importantly for all of us, what are the red flags? How can we spot something like this in the future?
Well, once John Carriaro's first article was published in the Wall Street Journal, it was like a dam breaking. The fallout was fast and brutal. Regulators shut down the labs, calling them an immediate jeopardy to patient health. They had to void 2 whole years of test results. Investors lost more than $700 million. And Elizabeth Holmes? Well, she went from being a celebrated icon to a convicted felon, sentenced to over 11 years in federal prison.
So this is maybe the most important takeaway for all of us. What can we learn from this mess? These are the red flags, the patterns you need to look out for. First, that authority stacking, using big, powerful names who know nothing about the actual field. Second, this obsession with secrecy, always hiding behind trade secrets to avoid any real scrutiny. Then there's the founder myth, where we fall in love with the story of the person instead of looking at the hard data. And finally, just hype over substance, all sizzle, no steak. So in a world that is just full of hype, how do we tell the difference between a real visionary and the next big fraud? The Theranos story is such a powerful cautionary tale. It's a reminder that when something seems way too good to be true, that's not your cue to jump in. That's your cue to dig deeper. It's a reminder to ask the tough questions, to demand actual proof. Because there's one area where you can never, ever fake it till you make it, and that's when you're dealing with people's lives.